The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
This is as good a time as any to remind everybody that we never saw Donald Trump's tax returns during the presidential campaign. We saw the tax returns of every major party nominee for the previous 40 or so years. We saw Hillary Clinton's tax returns during the 2016 campaign, but we never saw Donald Trump's. And this is particularly relevant in light of what happened this week with Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort. The idea during the campaign was that whatever is in the tax returns is more damaging than the PR problem Trump was having by not releasing them. And this is now as good a time as any to revisit that, because two of Donald Trump's closest staffers were convicted of tax fraud and campaign finance fraud this week, Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen. Amanda Turkle has a nice article in Huffington Post about this. She also points out that Trump's view on tax law is likely very loose given the tweet he sent about Paul Manafort, which I'll reread for you. We had this tweet on yesterday's show. Trump tweeted after the convictions, "I feel very badly for Paul Manafort and his wonderful family. Justice took a 12-year-old tax case, among other things, applied tremendous pressure on him, and unlike Michael Cohen, he refused to break." So it's very clear from the sum total of what Trump is tweeting there that because the tax violations of Paul Manafort, because they were 12 years old, it's just not really that serious to Donald Trump. So what we've got is, number one, Trump really doesn't want us to see his tax returns. We knew that because of his behavior during the campaign. Number two, Trump doesn't really consider tax crimes from years ago to be legitimate crimes in some way based on what he said about Paul Manafort. And number three, and this is the most important thing, multiple people surrounding Donald Trump during the campaign committed tax and finance related crimes. If there was any time where we would say, wait a second, more than ever before, it's time to see those tax returns, the time is now. And Trump's hesitation to show his taxes could be the simple arrogance of not wanting people to know that he's not as rich as he claims he is. That's been like the most benign explanation we got during the campaign. But when people around you start going down for tax fraud, including people who you were regularly reimbursing for stuff that wasn't always invoiced properly, sometimes, as I told you yesterday, the number 50,000 written on a piece of paper because you owed Michael Cohen 50 grand for some miscellaneous tech-related campaign services, everything is pointing to irregularities in Trump's own taxes, and his followers are defending his decision not to release the tax returns. That's the sickest part of it.
I was just thinking back to our younger years, our more naive days when we thought that Trump wouldn't release his tax returns because maybe he wasn't as rich as he claimed to be, or that he wasn't paying a very high tax rate. Now that stuff seems to be old news. It seems to be a lot more serious than that.
And the sick irony of it is that the guy who claimed he'd be all about transparency has somehow bamboozled his own supporters into defending his opacity with the taxes. They say, good for Trump. He's not going to bow to pressure from the media to do something that he doesn't legally have to do. Do you understand you're part of the problem, not the solution, if that's what you're saying? Because he said when the audits are finished, I'll maybe release them. And of course, the IRS explained that you can release your taxes whether or not you're under audit. And time and again, every moment where it would have just been the logical thing for any normal person to say, I'm going to put the taxes out, Trump hasn't done it. Maybe when the audits are done, he'll finally release the taxes. Maybe those are still ongoing.
Well, Rachel Maddow did show us the front page from his 1040 from 2005.
Yes.
So you're not satisfied with just that?
Well, it really didn't tell us very much, unfortunately. But the lead up, the 25 minutes of lead up was exciting, if nothing else. Listen, we've got to see the tax returns. The guy is surrounded by people who are getting convicted of finance and tax related crimes. It's obvious that we've got to see those tax returns. And I implore the sane right-wingers, they do exist. I've met a couple of them in my day. Demand the tax returns. It's time to do it. So we already discussed that Donald Trump is clearly signaling to Paul Manafort that he's going to pardon him. On yesterday's program, we talked about that. We don't know exactly who Trump will pardon, but we've now learned that Republican leaders are panicking that Trump is going to start dishing out pardons like Halloween candy and that it's going to be really, really bad. There's a new report from from NBC News, which says that a senior Republican Party source is hoping Trump won't, quote, dig the hole any deeper by handing out pardons to Manafort, Cohen, and possibly others. And these same Republicans are worried that if Trump does just start quickly and haphazardly pardoning people, including Manafort and Cohen, that it could make the calls for impeachment grow even further. There's also a New York Times report which confirms that Trump discussed the repercussions of pardoning Manafort with his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. And of course, Rudy Giuliani seems to be giving great legal advice to Donald Trump. Giuliani told the New York Times that pardoning Manafort, who of course on Tuesday was found guilty on 8 of 18 counts, was not something that the president was considering. But who believes that? When Trump was asked during that Fox News interview yesterday or the day before, are you considering pardoning Manafort? He didn't even answer the question, instead saying he has great respect for Manafort, which is yet another signal that he probably is thinking of pardoning the guy. And not surprisingly, Trump's aides are also worried that Trump might have a complete and total meltdown over the convictions at any time. Apparently, Trump's been staying sort of calm for the last day or so since the guilty verdicts and counts against Cohen and Manafort. But the staff surrounding Donald Trump is acutely aware that at any point he might implode. And that's where we are. Like, how wild is that the president is managed like a little kid? Staffers are worried that he'll have a meltdown, the equivalent of like a little kid's tantrum, and he has to be placated with the propaganda file twice a day where it's like screenshots and printouts of positive tweets and pictures of Trump looking powerful that media have used. He is managed like a little child, and he could launch nuclear weapons at any time. And there's actually a fourth source quoted by NBC News which used the term emotional meltdown, that there could be an emotional meltdown at any time as a result of these verdicts. If Trump isn't having a meltdown at this point, it's because he doesn't understand how serious the situation is. I would anticipate him losing his mind when he actually finds out how serious this is. Earlier in the week, we did the story from the New York Times about how White House counsel Don McGahn seemed to have full permission from Trump to go and meet with Mueller. And part of the reason why Trump didn't seem to have a problem with the meetings is Trump thought that White House counsel was there defending Trump, even though it's increasingly clear that McGahn was actually there as a cooperating witness. I think that's the theme. When Trump doesn't have a meltdown over something that should anger him or at least should concern him, it's probably because he doesn't get how serious it is. And I fully anticipate the guy's going to completely lose his mind when he actually figures out what's going on. He's mostly watching Fox News, right, which has been covering when the 8 Cohen counts were breaking and the 8 guilty verdicts against Paul Manafort were breaking. They were covering the Molly Tibbetts case, a serious case, but of course not something that supersedes everything that's going on with the president of the United States. He may not even understand how serious this stuff is.
I think we've started a new chapter with all of this stuff, or a new season, if you will. I think the House of Cards is going to start falling down because, you know, I mean, maybe a few months ago there would be an indictment here, and then it would be a few months before the next one, or something would break in the Russia scandal, but then there would be some time before the next thing happened. Now it's every day something new, and I don't think it's sustainable.
I think that based on, yesterday we showed you the results of a YouTube community poll that we did, 13,000 sample size from people who watch our show on YouTube, and 42% believe that Don Jr. is going to be the next Trump insider to get indicted. If he gets indicted, I can't imagine Trump's going to remain calm. That's going to set him off for sure, right?
Yeah. I mean, Don Jr. is one of Trump's 3 favorite sons. So I think he would stick by his son there.
He's definitely at least up there in some of his favorite people. Even though, didn't we learn he was recently calling him like boneheaded or something?
No, I didn't know that.
For his involvement in, like, all of a sudden now he thinks Don Jr. didn't handle the Trump Tower meeting well or something like that. Like, listen, it was insane to do it to begin with. The FBI should have been called. How understated is it to say, I don't like how Don Jr. handled the Trump Tower meeting?
Is he going to disavow his own son in all of this? I mean, that would be crazy. Jared Kushner, I could see. That's just your son-in-law.
He's not
he did
blood,
marry your daughter, but Don Jr.?
I think if he disavows Jared Kushner, he would insist that his daughter Ivanka unconvert to Judaism and go back to whatever religion.
For other reasons as well.
Whatever religion we believe is Donald Trump's religion. Yeah, so I follow a bunch of people on Twitter who have made claims over the last 6 to 12 months about the Trump Russia investigation, who have been vindicated, who have been right. They are saying the next 3 weeks are going to be absolutely and utterly insane, and we'll see if that's the case. Send me your thoughts about all of this. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Cheryl Gator. Cheryl, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Really appreciate it. And I also want to say thanks to Rebecca Capeless, known as Becky Capeless, who's been with us since 2013. I know Becky personally. She's a great person. She is more responsible for the success of the David Pakman Show than most people in the audience know. Let me put it that way. So great day to be a new member of the day for Cheryl Gator, the same day that Becky Capeless is longtime member of the day. And on that note, we will go to the phones, 617-830-4750. Let's see what's on people's minds, starting with our caller from 972. Caller from 972, go ahead.
Hey, David, this is Duncan.
Go ahead, Duncan. What's going on?
So I've been watching your show for a long time, and a huge fan. You're one of the few people that I actually agree with on a lot of things.
Oh, good.
Well, one thing I'm not fully understanding is why it's important, or what's the significance of Trump saying the N-word. Like, why does it matter? We already know that he has some racial tendencies. Why is it news that he would say an N-word, or a specific word in general?
You're completely right, Duncan, that anybody who has followed Donald Trump for the last 2 years wouldn't be at all shocked that Donald Trump uses the N-word. In fact, it's very likely that he does. It would be newsworthy for two reasons. And to be clear, I have made it clear from the beginning that the N-word story is not actually a top story, right? We've got dozens of indictments and guilty verdicts coming against Trump associates. Like the real stories are other stories. It's relevant sort of for two reasons. Number one, it would be sort of like the final debasement of the culture if Trump were on video throwing the N-word around and his supporters didn't care, which is probably what would happen. Like there would probably be no repercussions to that, when the truth is that the lack of decorum that we've already seen should have had consequences, and that would sort of be like the final straw. But you're right that, like, big picture, it's not that crazy as a revelation, because any reasonable person at this point probably assumes Trump uses the word.
Right, and I don't understand why people are making this a bigger deal than it really is. I don't
know if it's being made a bigger deal than it is. I mean, I think it's a salacious story that involves Omarosa and all of these different elements, but the president on tape using a word he claims isn't in his vocabulary does further go to his pathological lying, does further go to lying about his views about minorities. Like, it's not nothing, but I do agree with you that it's not by any means the biggest. Even on the day that it was the story, it wasn't the biggest story that day.
No, I agree. I think it's the fact that Omarosa had recordings to begin with, that she was in the security room and had recordings, and not just the N-word. I think Trump's very, very loyal fan base, I think, would be more relieved that a president would use such a word, because they already connect with the cadences and the way he talks to begin with.
Yeah, listen, Omarosa is a black woman and she's recording him secretly. He should be calling her the N-word, according to some of Trump's supporters.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, Duncan, very good. I appreciate the call. Thank you so much. Doesn't sound like we're in total disagreement. Just maybe good to clarify, I guess we can say. Let's go next to our caller from the 204 area code. Caller from 204, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah, who's this?
Oh, hi. So my name is Thomas, and I'm actually calling from Manitoba, Canada.
Oh, all right. That's okay.
Yeah, no, I saw your show, and it's a pleasure to listen to someone who understands what they're talking about.
Thank you.
So I have a question. I'm not sure if this is something you know anything about, but I figured if I have an opportunity to talk to you, I'd ask this. Tell me if you don't. So this is what I want to know. So as you know, the criminal justice systems in Canada and in the United States are very different. In Canada, we have more of a focus on rehabilitative kind of perspective, less on a punitive aspect. And on the American side, there's more of a focus on a punitive kind of aspect versus rehabilitative. Mm-hmm. This can be reflective in our recidivism rates. Recidivism in the States, it's about 77%, while in Canada, as of 2014-15, it's about 35%.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on this? Why do you, because many Canadians, it's a common train of line that we think our criminal justice system is too lenient. Well, so yeah, what do you think about that?
There's a couple different things in there. I mean, one thing you have to consider is there's a higher level question, which is just because something is designated a crime in a particular place at a particular point in time doesn't say anything objectively about that action, right? And so as proof of this, we know that there are things that used to be crimes that no longer are. There are things that did not used to be crimes that now are. There are things that now are crimes in certain places and not in certain others. So there's a few different elements. And if you want to point to recidivism rates as one way to analyze how effective the punishment system is, I think that that's fair. I think there's other ways to look at it as well. But consider that if there's an action that is criminalized in one place and not in another, and the action is kind of not a big deal, and it's something that if you do it, you're probably going to continue doing it, that in and of itself is going to lead to high recidivism rates. So, like, what am I talking about? Possession of marijuana, as an example. We are going in the direction of decriminalizing marijuana more and more in more and more states. But if you just make a habit of having marijuana and sometimes smoking pot, and it's a crime, that's going to be a high recidivism rate because you're likely to continue having marijuana and sometimes smoking pot. That doesn't mean necessarily that the problem is the punishment. It's that it's a crime at all, if that makes sense. So I think that what you're asking is multifaceted, and there's really no one answer, but there's a lot of kind of top-level stuff that we need to sort out.
So in Canada, I'm sure one of the biggest differences you're aware is our use of minimum sentencing is far less than the American equivalent. For example, and I have a criminal code with me. Let's talk about, say, common. What's the equivalent? Say sexual assault. There was sexual assault, rape in the States. Now, I'm a criminal justice student, and I've learned under lawyers and stuff like that. Anyways, the big thing is. In Canada, based on what my professors have told me, and based on what the criminal code is saying, the maximum penalty is about 14 years. Now, realistically, you're looking at more like 8 to 10, 8. Now, I know the American equivalent, if the same action will be taken, is significantly longer. I've seen incidences where they're in prison for over 20 years. That's like our value systems as nations are very simple. I mean, speaking to marijuana will be legalized in Canada come October, actually.
Yeah, was there a follow-up question, Thomas? Because we're not, I mean, we don't have unlimited time, and I'm just wondering if there's a question in there.
But the question is do you think, do you think do you think there's a difference in how both nations value rehabilitation? That's basically what my question was.
Yes, there is a difference for sure, and that's a difference that we have talked about before and that we will continue to talk about. 617-830-4750. Let's try our caller from the 813 area code. Caller from 813, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Sort of. It sounds like we're either on like Bluetooth or speaker.
How's this? Is this better?
That is better. Thank you.
Okay. I just had hi, my name's Andrew, calling from Tampa, Florida.
Great.
And I just had a... Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were saying something. I had two questions. First question is, have you been paying attention to the... Let's see, was it... Oh, the case, I believe it was a week ago. It was right around the time the Omarosa tape scandal happened. So I put scandal in quotation marks.
Which case is that you're talking about?
the the coalition forces in Iraq, one of the spokespersons, a colonel, I believe, I can't remember his name, basically saying to reporters, "Oh yeah, we're just going to be here until we're done." You know,
yes, we covered it on the bonus
ambiguous.
show. I'm aware of that story.
You did cover it? Okay. I'm an internet listener. I don't have the show yet on anything, so I only hear snippets of your show. So, okay. My other question is, have you also been aware of what's going on with Turkey and Kurdistan? That whole Syrian border debacle?
What specifically about it?
Like,
oh boy. All right, listen, now your connection is just cutting out. I'm sorry. I'm aware of the countries and that there is a conflict. Your connection is a disaster right now, so I'm going to have to let you go. Okay, let's try the 434 area code. Caller from 434, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, just speak up and we can hear you.
Okay, you're not on speaker.
Cool.
I was calling about an old video that I watched a while ago. It's not recent, between you and Kyle Kalinske.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you guys were basically trying to refute the one article that I believe said that the right actually dominates YouTube.
Right.
And Kyle disagreed with that. And I believe you did as well, but
yeah,
I was going to say that I think the right does dominate YouTube. I'm going to be honest, because the amount of subscribers that, say, Steven Crowder has, and the amount of views that he has, if you go to his channel, he's got like 500 million views. Now, that's just Steven Crowder. I think that's more than you have. I think that's more than Kyle Kalinske has.
Well, we've got, I mean,
I
think we've got close to 500 million views.
We have 350 million.
We have 350. Okay.
Well, yeah. See, I'm not saying that I'm a big fan of your show.
I get it. I get it. You're saying that you said you honestly feel as though the right does dominate YouTube. I mean, I think to really make that assessment, you'd have to have more than just like how many views does Crowder have versus me, right? We'd need to have we'd need to systematize the question, and we'd need to say we are going to look at total subscribers and total views for channels starting at some. Okay, it sounds like you have more you want to say.
One more point.
I haven't even responded, but it sounds like you're on to the next point, right?
No. I just wanted to elaborate just a bit more, because what you said is true. Like I did bring up Crowder, but like the larger point I was going to make was if you go and you look at Crowder, or you look at Shapiro, or you look at, say, Milo Yiannopoulos, like these guys are huge. Like the following that these guys have is massive.
Mm-hmm.
And the left doesn't seem to have any sort of following, or at least not a following that is as large as theirs is. So I'm saying
that's the exact same point you made. Hold on a second. Let me see if we can talk through this, because this is interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
You interrupted my response to your first point to say that here's really what you want to say, and then you just said the exact same thing and still didn't. You cited even less data.
I mean, I'm just trying to say that I don't see how the left-wing counterparts to Crowder are even half the channels aren't half the size. You don't have half the views. It's just.
What about the Young Turks?
It's a silly point to make. What about the Young Turks?
So they're way bigger than Crowder, right? Like orders of magnitude bigger than Crowder. Where do they figure in?
Well, I mean that's a decent point. I just feel like overall, I feel like.
But the thing is, you're not making a point overall. That's here. So this is a good lesson in thinking critically. I'm trying to talk with you about overall, right? Because Kyle and I, in that video clip, we said, big picture, how do we assess the strength of the left versus the strength of the right on YouTube? You called me and you first said, Steven Crowder. Steven Crowder's channel is bigger than yours. And I said, okay, sure. But what we need to do, when you interrupted me, I was trying to explain to you that we would need to establish some kind of system to say, how are we going to measure overall? And then I gave you an anecdotal counterpoint, which was the Young Turks. And then you switched from saying, look at Steven Crowder, to saying, okay, yeah, but we need to look at it overall. That's what I'm telling you. We need to look at it overall. How would we do that?
I do appreciate the consistency. Yeah, you do make a good point.
Good. All right, very good. Listen, I appreciate the call. We will look into measuring the size of the left and right on YouTube. I mean, I think it would be an interesting thing, right? Let's figure out, do we say, let's look at channels 10,000 subscribers and larger that publish in news and politics, at least, that they're active channels, and then let's add up the total number of subscribers. We'll rank them as left, right, or sort of non-political, and see where it shakes out. We could do that. I think it would be an interesting exercise, and we could figure that out once and for all. Let's take a quick break. Don't hang up if you're holding, because we're going to do another round of phone calls after the break. Don't hang up. Quick break. More calls after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Let's go back to the phones at 617-830-4750, see what's on people's minds. Very big news week. Let's go to our caller from the 340 area code. Caller from 340, tell us who you are. You can jump right into your question.
Hello, yeah, this is Riley. I'm from the United States Virgin Islands, still part of the United States for the time being. My question is, I've been hearing quite a lot about social democracies that sort of further left than I'm normally used to sort of thinking. And as I've been sort of digging into it, I'm beginning to realize that I don't really have any sources, any sort of information, any articles, any compendiums of information about this sort of thinking when it comes to economics, when it comes to social policy, and that sort of thing. And I wanted to know, what would you even recommend to somebody who's sort of delving into this for the first time?
Well, have you at least done a Google search and just looked at the history of these movements and some of the key thinkers within them?
Yeah. Vaguely.
So then what you do is you start there, then you look at who is quoted in a lot of those writings, and then you look at their work, and then you can start to build up knowledge about it. Now, I'm curious, I think more interesting than me listing sources would be, you said that social democracy is a little bit to the left of where you are. So social democracy just means well-regulated capitalism with a priority on social welfare. What about that is too far left to you?
Well, the thing is that my frame of mind coming out before I moved towards finding interest in that was generally, you could fix anything with just a little bit of capitalism. You could fix anything with, and then you maybe shave a little bit of the edge off of that. But as I started to think about it more, it's more shaving and more shaving than there is actually solving issues via broader markets or what have you. And my thinking is just changed on this.
But you've moved to the left or to the right is what I'm trying to understand.
I've moved to the left. I've most certainly moved to the left here.
Okay, but you're saying that social democracy is too far. So is social democracy to your left or to your right?
It is to my left. When I say that I'm also moving further left, I have been also listening to people who are even further left than social democracy, recommending social democracy as sort of a transition point for the left. Sort of.
But so, okay, let me ask you specifically on the issue of healthcare. What would you be your solution to healthcare? Let's see if maybe that helps us figure out where you are on the spectrum.
My solution was government-subsidized healthcare, not single-payer. My solution would have been a situation much like Obamacare if it wasn't so sort of deeply gutted right now, where people get incentives to buy healthcare, much in the same way that people are given incentives to insure their cars. But I
mean, that actually is slightly to the right of social democracy. So yeah, that on that one, that does make sense. All right, very good. Well, listen, plenty of good resources online. Start with the wiki articles, look at the source lists, and then, you can develop a good reading list for yourself. Very short introduction to socialism is also good. It covers both sort of like state socialism and social democracy. I just read that recently. So one idea for you there.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Appreciate the call. Great to hear from the U.S. Virgin Islands. It is, as he said, for now, still part of the United States. Let's go next to our caller from the 330 area code. Caller from 330, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Zach from Ohio.
Great, go ahead, Zach.
Okay, so I have this idea for gun control, and I was wondering what you thought of it.
Okay.
So I'm not too keen on magazine in limit bans and stuff like that because they don't seem to have much impact on actually reducing crime. So
how did you determine that? How did you determine that limiting the number of bullets someone can fire without reloading doesn't have an impact on crime?
I have seen studies where it shows that people tend to just reload, and it doesn't really make much impact. Maybe I'm wrong on that.
You're talking about in mass shooting scenarios?
Yes, and
I'd love to see that data because what I'm seeing, I mean, mass shootings are rare enough that there's usually quite a bit of information, and it seems as though there's data to suggest that the reload phase is often where the mass shooting is stopped. So I'd want to see that data. But go ahead.
Like I said, maybe I'm wrong on that.
Yeah.
But also, mass shootings are rare, as you said.
Well, no, they're not. They're really not that. I mean, they're rare enough that we know about them. But if you actually look at the gun violence archive, with the way mass shootings are defined, there's shockingly many. Like, you would be shocked at how many mass shootings there were just yesterday.
Yeah, because with it only being 4 people that need to be injured.
Yeah.
But I believe that there should be some sort of punishment for people who are not handling they're not a safe gun owner, people who do not for instance lock up their guns in a gun safe.
Mm-hmm.
I think if their gun gets stolen and then used in a shooting, I think there should be some sort of punishment for that.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think that infrastructure already exists in some states, but it's just very rarely actually enforced. But yeah, I agree with you. To me, it's not hugely controversial, but there are people on the gun rights fetishist side who would say, these are restrictions, they are extra constitutional. So it's an interesting idea. It's not a unique idea, and I say that with total peace and love. It's just more about getting the gun rights people to go along with it, and a lot of them will not. But I do appreciate the call, appreciate the idea. 617-830-4750 is the number. Let's see who's joining us from, I don't know, maybe the 786 area code, who's been holding on for a while. Who's calling from 786?
Hey, David, how you doing?
Good.
Hey, so the question that I wanted to ask you is, why are people, I guess Republicans, are so afraid of democratic socialism? And I want to give you some context behind this because I come from Cuba, which is very communist, and I know what it's like to be without rights and without having an ability to, share what I'm thinking.
Right.
So I just want to get your thoughts on that.
So why the question is
so afraid of?
The question is, why are Republicans so afraid of democratic socialism?
Democratic socialism. Yeah.
There's a couple different answers to that. There are some who have just been so indoctrinated by the caricature of democratic socialism that they just have this emotionally visceral response. And that is kind of hard to diffuse when you're talking to those individuals. The others have basically been indoctrinated into standard neoliberal capitalism as the system, and they may have some accurate ideas about what democratic socialism is and some inaccurate ideas. The truth is that socialism is much more complex than most people even really can appreciate and understand. So you've got a range of social democracy, which is not really socialism. As I've pointed out, you're talking about a more socially conscious and regulated mixed economy that includes capitalism and private ownership, all the way to totalitarian, Stalinist communism with one-party state control of everything and a de facto authoritarian police state. And in between that stuff, there's a really big range. I mean, I actually think it's less interesting to think about why the right is so afraid of democratic socialism, because they often don't even really know what we're talking about. I think it's more interesting to have people on the left, as I've been trying to do, discuss the merits and demerits of socialism versus utopian socialism versus libertarian socialism versus social democracy versus the system we have. I think you're going to get much further because you're correct in pointing out that whether you're for or against socialism, you should really understand what it is if you're going to make an argument for or against it. And by and large, the right has no clue what it's talking about on the issue.
If I should add something, I think that people should listen more to the ideas of Bernie and Alexandra Ocasio, because what they're saying are essentially, you know, what Europe is essentially doing.
That's right.
And they're good ideas at the end of the day. And you should also keep capitalism as a form of government, but, you know, also add that in because it is helpful to the community, I guess.
Listen, part of my view is that I rarely find the solutions in extremes, and that way I end up, and for many other reasons, which I don't have time for now, but maybe you've seen my clips on it, unregulated vulture capitalism is an extreme, and for me, it's not a solution to how society should be organized. State-run, single-party, totalitarian, authoritarian communism, to me, is an extreme, and it's not how we should organize society. In the middle, there is a gray area where I am right now, and my feelings have evolved over my life. I am at a mixed economy that retains private business, a progressive tax system within a broader capitalist sort of atmosphere or infrastructure that is heavily regulated with significant funding put towards social welfare programs and ensuring that the basic needs of everybody are met, with the understanding that you can't just say the system we have isn't working well, so we'll make a small tweak to it. You really need to make significant changes to have true social democracy. That's where I am, because I don't believe in extremes as the solutions on this particular issue. And if people want to disagree with me, go ahead.
No, that's perfectly fine, and I definitely agree. Honestly, in government, there should be gray areas. There shouldn't be black or white. You know, it just doesn't work that way, in my opinion.
All right, very good. Appreciate the call. Thank you so much. Great to hear from you. We are out of time for calls. To everybody we didn't get to, and there are lots of people holding close to 15 at this point. I apologize, but what I can promise you is that we will take calls again, and I look forward to hearing from you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let's get into audience questions for the week. Some very important ones, including our first question today about reverse racism, which asks, hey, David, does reverse racism exist and what is it? I have been hearing about reverse racism, but I don't exactly understand how it is different from just racism. So let's go through this in sort of three parts. First, what do we mean when we say racism? Let's start there. Dictionary definition. It serves our purposes well enough. Racism is prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race on the belief that one's own race is superior. I think the superiority part is sometimes not so explicit, but it is sort of implicit if you're making a criticism or arguing for the discrimination or antagonism of someone based on their race. It sort of is implicit in that it's because their race is at least in some way not as good. That's racism. Reverse racism usually is meant to refer to when the people normally being discriminated against on the basis of race are being racist against some other group, which may also be a minority or discriminated against group, or sometimes against the agent identity, right? And not Asian, agent, A-G-E-N-T. So you would say that in the United States, the agent racial identity, the sort of de facto around which our concepts of race are based, are the majority white population of the United States. If whites are being discriminated against on the basis of race, sometimes one would call that reverse racism. Sometimes reverse racism can also apply to, like, if Latinos are discriminating against African Americans, both groups that are often discriminated against, one discriminating against another. I think that this is not a useful concept. And I know that there are people who are going to reach out to me and say, David, no, it's important to have the concept of reverse racism because the dynamics are different in terms of the power that different groups hold, and it's relevant to identify if something is racist or reverse racist. No, it waters down the concept of racism, it becomes a political football, and it becomes similar to the term regressive left and what SJW have become. So regressive left at one point, I think, did accurately describe a supposedly or ostensibly progressive person who is failing to actually be progressive, right? The regressive left means people call themselves left-wingers, but they are authoritarian or in other ways adhere to ideologies that are not actually progressive. It has become totally devalued and now is just a way for the right and even for the left to just attack ideas on the left that they don't like. That's a regressive idea. You're part of the regressive left. In the same way, let's assume with peace and love that at one point reverse racism really had a very specific and narrow meaning and was a useful concept. At this point, the term reverse racism does not serve us. It does not serve real serious discussions about race. If something is racist, it is racist. I don't care who's doing it. It should be called out. Typically, discriminated against groups can be racist, and so can white Christian men or whatever agent identities, white straight Christian men. No matter what your identity is, you can be racist. And then if you want to talk about power dynamics, because there is an element of power dynamics in race, you can discuss whether that racism on behalf of whoever is espousing it is being put into practice in some way. But I think that the concept of reverse racism is not one that is useful to the left. And it's really important not to let the right get away with using it either.
Yeah, I think a lot of these terms like regressive left and reverse racism, they're just there to save you a few words. Like you don't have to go into too much explanation because the word or phrase kind of tells you all you need to know. I don't think reverse racism saves you that many words, though. If you want to say, if you were trying to imply that it's racism against white people, that's all you got to say. I mean, is it really that big of a difference?
I tend to agree. I don't know that it really saves us that much. You know, sometimes we say people stereotype because since there are 7 billion people on the planet, or however many there are, we don't know everybody. So we try to find patterns which we can use to allow us to sort of skip to making assessments about a person. That's sort of the point of stereotyping inherently. It's very often wrong. It very often leads to bad decisions or bad policy or bad ideas, but that's sort of the objective of stereotyping. When we think about reverse racism as a way to characterize a particular type of racism, I don't think it saves us a particularly significant amount of time, and I don't even think it provides value as a concept. So don't use it. Don't allow the right to use it to argue, for example, against affirmative action. There's a history of the term reverse racism being used to argue against affirmative action. Argue for or against affirmative action on the merits, not by using buzzwords like reverse racism. And if people ask, can there be racism against a majority group? Sure, that's called racism. Whatever the majority group is, there can be racism. We simply don't need the term. Next question today. Hey, David, aren't Democrats just as responsible for Donald Trump being president of the United States as Republicans? The answer is, of course, it depends on what you mean by responsible. So first and foremost, just as responsible. Are Democrats just as responsible for Donald Trump as are Republicans? The answer is no, okay? So at the micro level, if you look at the 2016 election, the people that are directly responsible for Donald Trump being president are the people that voted for him and also the people that didn't vote at all, right? Because when you have 50% election turnout, if you don't vote, that is a decision with consequences that you have made. So at the micro level, no. The people who voted for Trump and the people who didn't vote at all are responsible for Trump being president of the United States. Now, is there a way in which Democrats are part of the problem which led to Trump being president? The answer is absolutely, okay? I am not in this analysis throwing in with those who say Hillary was as bad as Trump. I am not throwing in with those who say it doesn't matter whether Trump is president or not. I'm not throwing in with them at all. But what I am here to tell you is that, number one, the idea that we live in a truly functioning democracy in the United States is an absolute and total farce. We have in the United States a corporatocracy where corporate power and maintaining the status quo of Democrats and Republicans who disagree about the minimum wage and net neutrality and other really important issues. But by and large, all are complicit in maintaining this status quo where corporations and their lobbyists get more and more and more powerful, and the individual has less and less bargaining power. It is all part of the problem. And in general, big picture, you are not going to have the support of those who benefit from the status quo if you want to change the status quo. And this is why when we talk about the big meta issues like campaign finance reform and some of those other issues on which Democrats and Republicans, they might have different sounding rhetoric, but by and large, none of them are doing anything to change the system. They are all going to be opposing forces to really reforming the system in a way that will work better for the individual. So the people who voted for Trump are the ones that we say, you are specifically responsible for Donald Trump now being president. But the fact that we have had decade after decade of corporate power building, the neoliberal, centrist, center-right status quo, no real challenges to both corporate power and maintaining the campaign finance system that we have, it's all led us to a place where Donald Trump shows up, helped by Russia, I don't deny that for a second, and slowly but surely knocks out each of the 16 or 17 other Republicans that were running against him. They are all part of the problem, and it is a much bigger problem than Trump supporters. So I want to be, I hope, Pat, I'm not riding the fence, because I'm trying to be really, really clear. Democrats who voted for Hillary aren't personally part of why Donald Trump is president, but everybody who has participated, and when I'm talking about Democrats and Republicans, I mean our elected officials, in maintaining the system we have, they are all responsible for what we are now dealing with.
But David, it just makes me feel more comfortable to say that it was James Comey's fault, or that it was Russia's fault, or that it was Jill Stein's fault. I mean, why do I have to bear some responsibility here?
Well, you don't, and that's the exact sort of like ostrich bearing their head in the ground ideology or mentality that too many people on the left and right are participating in. And I'm not doing the left and right are the same, left and the right do it equally. That's not what I do. But what I am telling you is that our Democratic and Republican elected officials are all part of the problem that we're now dealing with. Hey, David, you've talked about the intellectual dark web and so-called free speech warriors. They always say that their number one priority is to participate in the battle of ideas and to debate and to figure out which are the best ideas. But do you believe that free speech warriors and the intellectual dark web actually want full, robust debate? No, they don't. Next question. No, I mean, let's flesh it out a little bit, okay? There is no doubt that the intellectual dark web and so-called free speech warriors have built a following on the idea of we want debate, we don't want to limit speech, we want all speech, maybe short of illegal speech, to be legal, and we want to fight out the idea battle to figure out which ideas are the best. Let's discuss, though, whether that's actually what they want. I believe that it is not what they want, and I think that it has become very, very clear because when you look at critiques of the broader intellectual dark web movement or the free speech warrior movement, which free speech warrior, it's kind of like a counter to the social justice warrior. I tend to say that those who attack social justice warriors as an ad hominem are sort of like the free speech warrior movement. There's a lot of overlap with the IDW, but it's not the exact same group.
We know what that term means, though.
Yeah, I think we have a sense.
I think it, pretty straightforward.
You know who I'm talking about here. One of the broader trends is when you critique the movement as not being a movement that actually wants to figure out the best way to organize society, but they're actually pushing a particular agenda, for example, or that they want debate, but they want arbitrarily narrow debate, which they've already predetermined is okay. You very quickly see that they don't really want the broadest form of debate where all ideas are able to be evaluated on the merits. Because if you go and critique the intellectual dark web movement, either because you find that it is a sort of a useful idiot or a conduit to the furthering of bad and already debunked ideas, you will be immediately attacked, and not because of the argument you're making. If you want some examples, just look at my YouTube clips about the subject matter. When I have pointed out certain deficiencies in some of the ideas championed by the intellectual dark web, or some of the arguments being made by some of the members of the intellectual dark web, the critiques of me are overwhelmingly ad hominems and claims that I'm merely a shill for this, that, or the other ideology. Those aren't arguments, and people who really want to debate the merits don't respond in that way. Now, if your response is going to be, well, David, then debate some of the ideas with these people. Gladly. They are all welcome on the program at any time. We've invited Sam Harris on the program numerous times, even though he has sort of a different place in the intellectual dark web. He has to date not accepted. Ben Shapiro has been on before, and I've invited him to come back on, and so far he has not agreed to. Dave Rubin is welcome back on the program anytime. After I actually engaged with him in the battle of ideas, and we talked about healthcare and taxation and so many other things in an hour-long interview, I think at this point he may want absolutely nothing to do with me. We used to text sort of regularly, and I've barely heard from him since, and I don't think he wants to be back on the show. He's welcome anytime. Jordan Peterson has been on the program, and he is welcome back anytime, although it doesn't seem like he wants to be on. I was in touch via Twitter with Brett Weinstein, and I would love to have him on. He is a sort of more left-wing member of the intellectual dark web. He sent a couple tweets back saying, maybe what would be the format? And I said the format would be, I just talk to you. There won't be callers. There won't be other guests. It's just you and I have a conversation. Never heard back from him. So I am not the one here who is shying away from a discussion and a real engagement in the battle of ideas. They have no responsibility to me to show up and debate me in any way, but it's an open invitation. And what's at least clear is that I am very willing to engage on the ideas specifically. And right now, it doesn't seem like they actually want to do that.
Yeah, I think when they talk about the battle of ideas, by and large, of course, they're not talking about specific policies. They're just talking about the importance of having a society that embraces free speech. And that's what it's all about. Like when you actually get into specific policy ideas with many of them, they tend to fall apart. So I would love to see any of those people come on and you actually discuss healthcare policy with them, or guns, or any of those kind of issues, and really frame it that way.
I think I would take maybe a half step back, because you very broadly generalize that they fall apart when you talk about policy. I think that on some of them do, with some policies, no question about it. But I think what we would very quickly find is that if I sat down with any of the members of the intellectual dark web, left, right, or middle, if there are any in the middle, I don't know necessarily.
Dave Rubin.
Dave Rubin, of course, he is in the middle. Yeah, he's part of the new center, actually. I think we would very quickly get to the idea that when both sides are really actually open to a full and free exchange of ideas, it starts to become evident which ideas are better pretty quickly. And you have to then say, you know, we don't actually have to spend as much time talking about engaging in the battle of ideas, because you can very quickly start to figure out which ideas are good and which ideas are not so good. And that's what I unfortunately don't see that much of coming out of this movement. Send me your thoughts. I'm ready for the ad hominems. I'm ready for people to write in and say I fundamentally or deliberately am misunderstanding what these people say. I'm ready for it. We've been dealing with it for more than a year at this point. So have at it, and we will talk to you on today's bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.